I'm very thrilled with the group we pulled together to have this conversation, and also don't let us limit the conversation to the five of us. I think this is a great topic. I have to give Andrea Michelbach at PLU credit for whispering in my ear about the idea for a conversation like this. And she just got the ball rolling, and I sped it up, thinking about all the different directions you could go, talking about what the annual giving org chart looks like today. So thank you, Andrea. And that was sort of an introduction. We'll come back to you in a second. Andrea Michelbach from Pacific Lutheran University. There's my old friend and co-conspirator, Margaret Neitzel, which we've already established is not here in person in Seattle. Came all the way to see her, and she's sitting in Santa Rosa, California, quite a few months pregnant, and is a trooper to have stuck through this day. We'll see what both of us look like tomorrow after my flight and running you into the ground. But how are you? You're still going?
Still going strong.
Thank you for being a very fabulous co-conspirator.
We're excited.
Let's say hi to Connor Tudbury, who's here from Boise State. Great to have Idaho in the house. Connor, how are you? Thanks for being here.
Doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm glad I could be a part of this.
Representing smartly with that sweatshirt he's got on, and then the little bit of the ringer in the group, if I may say so, who's kind of got the 10,000-foot view in this conversation from the Aspen Leadership Group is Ashleigh Buderus, deep in Colorado, I think, right?
That's correct. Yep. So nice to see everybody.
And if you're not familiar with Aspen Leadership Group, you should be, because they facilitate searches, and so that makes her a very useful voice in this discussion about what she's seeing from her side of the table, if you want to put it that way. And Ashley I recruited her on the faculty of the CASE Senior Annual Giving Conference a few years back, and I haven't seen her since, so it's nice to catch up with you, and thank you for doing this.
I agree. Great to be here, so thanks.
Feel free to fill up the chat with questions. I think I'm doing double duty here as a panelist and also keeping an eye on the chat. Margaret, I should just make you a co-host too, so I can spread the misery of the.
Feel free.
Yeah, so there you go. And but feel free to tell us if you want to chime in and chat. Again, I'm proud of this group, but we don't have to limit ourselves to this group either. And we have a lot of things to talk about. And we won't overstay our welcome either, because the people in Seattle are going down to the German bar after this, and we don't want to hold that up. And everybody else will probably have more of enough of a fill of us down then. Yeah, just showing the thirsty crowd. Okay, so here's where I would like to begin. It's just, I guess my three practitioners, Andrea, Margaret, and Connor. Would you tell us a little bit about what your annual giving org chart looks like currently, even if there may not be much of a chart to speak of? And then I want to give Ashleigh a chance to sort of say anything she wants to say, knowing what the topic is. And then we've got some questions that we want to dive a little bit deeper into. Margaret, do you mind if I start with you?
No, I'd be happy to start, and I appreciated your caveat, because the Great Resignation has certainly struck us, as I'm sure it has many of you. Some important context is, I would say, our annual giving shop is and has been 4 people, but historically it was very siloed. So it was actually housed within the larger major gifts department, which had some pros and cons. But in fiscal year 19, we were moved under the Office of Alumni Engagement, and that has been a huge boon for us in terms of getting to access, I would say, their mass marketing channels, and then also being surrounded by other colleagues who focus on broad-based messaging. And that also perfectly aligned with pivoting our entire shop to focus more on participation as opposed to dollars in the door, which is what we need in order to work on boosting our alumni participation rate. So we are within the Office of Alumni Engagement that has an AVP at the top that reports to the Vice President of University Advancement. And within the Office of Alumni Engagement, there's 3 teams. There is the annual giving team, a marketing team, and the engagement team. So we each have a director and an assistant director, and usually some support staff. I think all in all, the team would traditionally be between 12 and 15 people. It has been a 5 to 6 person team since last summer, but we're working on staffing back up. But our annual giving team, 4 folks: director, assistant director, a coordinator, and a senior advancement assistant. As the director, I mostly focus on strategy and cross-departmental collaboration. Then my assistant director focuses on running our Giving Day and our Telehawk program, and a little bit of starting to dabble in student philanthropy. Our coordinator, we hope to eventually have focus on coordination, but really is a content creator. So she is like our young team member, very focused on tons of writing, tons of graphic design, social media content, very jack of all trades. And traditionally, our senior advancement assistant focused on a lot of that admin work, but we've been working hard over the past 2 years to automate more of the admin work, and she's starting to lean more into a donor liaison role. So she does a lot of small batch email communications, follow-ups to our campaigns, and actually we already transitioned her external title when she's communicating with a donor to donor liaison so that they know they have someone on their side. And then the big push we're making over the winter is to create a leadership annual giving officer position. So 4, hoping to be 5, nestled within the larger Office of Alumni Engagement.
I want to come back to the topic of leadership annual giving officers specifically, because that's a really interesting idea at the moment. But let me give the rest of our friends a chance to chime in. Andrea, how about your overview, please?
Sure. So Andrea, we're a Pacific Lutheran, which is a small private arts college down south of Seattle in Tacoma, which is better than Seattle. Oh yeah, it's weird. I mean, if the wood paneling doesn't clue you into us being in the same world, I don't know what will. But I'll start at the top. So we exist within university relations, which is constituent engagement, advancement, and marketing and communications. We used to just be advancement, and now we're, as of about 2, maybe 3 years ago, what is time, we merged with Marcom. So annual giving is under the constituent engagement department, and that includes alumni and student connections, our alumni and career office merge to sort of better leverage our alumni as a resource for current students. And then donor relations and advancement services is there, and annual giving. And we currently are a mighty team of 2. We should be 3, but within the last, it's been about a year that our whole team, except for me, has turned over. So myself as the director of annual giving, like Margaret, is focusing on a lot of the strategy, segmentation piece, like cross-departmental communications and liaisoning. And then we also do quite a bit of work for athletics fundraising support. The assistant director role is really focused on a lot of our direct marketing outreach. So that's everything from appeals, digital, direct mail. It also includes crowdfunding. We're both involved in our Giving Day, just besides our team. Yeah, and then we'll have a third position, that used to be sort of a donor advisor, leadership annual giving kind of mini major gift officer, and that we weren't seeing that pipeline the way we wanted to, and it was just, their portfolio was too small to really be working at the scale we need to in annual giving. And so we're rethinking that as a donor advisor or donor experience officer position right now. So also that leadership annual giving mid-level space is very front of mind for us.
Thank you for that. So I can hear her fine because she's right over there. Would you all nod if her volume is okay? That's a thumbs up. Good.
Okay.
Compliments to Seattle University for the trip down auditorium that we're in. Thank you for that. And I'm already picking up a theme that our team isn't the size it used to be. And I think Connor might add to that. Connor, tell us about the situation at Boise State.
Yeah, I can add to that. Our annual giving team is me, and it's been just me for, oh gosh, a little over 2 years now. I report up to our AVP of development, who supervises myself as well as our major gift team. And then she reports to our VP for advancement overall. So it's pretty tight chain, I guess. And sort of the way I've been able to manage things over the last 2 years of being a team of one is, and this will be my answer, I think, for probably a lot of questions today, is just relying really heavily on students. So in addition to myself, I have students who coordinate our crowdfunding campaigns. I have a student who runs our giving day, students who pretty much run our call center pretty hands-off. And then I have a graduate student who kind of fills in where needed and theoretically helps with data analysis, though we're finding we may need to get a more specific skill set for that, to dig in even further. So that's sort of our org chart.
That's making lemonade out of lemons, it sounds like to me. Use the resources you got. Thank you for that. And Ashleigh, I'm going to just throw you sort of a general opportunity to say what you're seeing from your perspective, although I want to ask about two things in particular. That Margaret referred to the resignation generation, and do you see that in the midst of your searches now? Are there any more challenges just finding people? And then I have to ask about the remote working preference, and if you think that's something we're all going to have to adjust to because it's going to stay, or is it sort of a short-term thing? Once we replace everybody who's resigning, can we sort of compel people to come back into the office?
All good questions. So yes, the Great Resignation is something we are seeing consistently right now. We have more open searches than we've had ever. I mean, we went from, COVID where everybody's froze hiring. So we've had a lot of hiring at the beginning of this year, thinking it was due to COVID, but it's just continued. So the Great Resignation is definitely happening. What that has meant is a few different things. One, there's lots of open positions. And so that has made it so that people are, it depends on which level it's at. We're seeing kind of that associate or director or senior director position. Those are sometimes harder to fill, or we're not getting as many candidates. And anytime I ask people in the field for recommendations, they will usually reply to me, we also have those positions open. Some of those are ones that we're seeing more of a demand for remote. When you get up to the AVP and VP levels, those are definitely going, well, a lot of jobs are going more quickly right now because there are so many opportunities open that people are really kind of going quickly, and they're kind of getting on the job market and off the job market at a fast pace in many regards. So it's happening. I would say, I'm going to read actually a quote our co-founder was in an article this week that was all, Robert Sharp did an article that was talking about the wealth transfer and how that was happening. And our co-founder, Ron Schiller, made a comment, and I think this actually says it pretty well in regard to what they're demanding. The fundraising job market is hotter and more competitive than I've ever seen it. And Ron has been in fundraising for his entire career, has over 30 years of kind of being in higher education, a lot of higher education, and many years in recruiting, so it says a lot. Candidates are more demanding. I'm talking to a lot of VPs about employees who don't want to work like they did before. Do they let these people go, allow them to work remotely, or come up with some hybrid mix of remote and in-person work? Answers will vary by organization, but the overall definition of workplace has changed. Managers unwilling to explore new models are likely to face increased challenges with recruitment and retention, which is very true. We're seeing now that candidates either won't apply or they just are hesitant to apply if there isn't either hybrid or if there isn't a remote opportunity. We've also seen a lot of organizations have an increased interest to diversify and be more inclusive, which is great. But what that has often meant is if they're in a rural part of the country that maybe isn't very diverse, it's hard to find people that want to move there or be in that community. And so it's looking at where are donors and how are you being inclusive with that. Also, we've seen a lot of women come out of the workplace. They're also calling it the Great She Session because a lot of working moms have said, how did I do this before? And they're saying, I don't want to go back to being in the office 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. That's for any working parent, I think, but women have definitely kind of taken that more so. So there's lots of changing tides. I think this panel is really great because I think there's lots of creative ways we've seen organizations shift things. I was telling Bob in the panel before we got on, We helped Food Bank for New York City hire a kind of leadership annual gift officer in Arkansas because she had lived in New York for over 9 years and knew it. And they have donors at their locations. And they said, you know what? Our donors aren't meeting with us in New York, so why does our gift officer need to be here? So all kinds of unique things, hiring an associate director for a food bank in Washington, DC, that will be anywhere because it's really.
Oh, trying to lock up on us there. So I can just add a couple things I've seen in the last 18 months. So Knox College is in deepest, darkest Western Illinois, just south of Peoria. And I've met their annual giving director in the past year who lives in Cincinnati, which is something I wouldn't have seen once upon a time. I'm also seeing companies who now will say things like, let us run your giving day for you. And we don't need, you may not have a digital team or bandwidth or whatever, will be your giving day in a box, which I also hadn't seen before. I don't know if I have a question on all this, just to share that that's, to Ashleigh's point, or to Ron's point, that's an evolution I'm seeing about sort of, it's not exactly outsourcing, is it? I guess, but it's outsourcing your own staff in a way that I hadn't seen much before. Anybody have an experience to share about that? Where, well, Margaret, you're sitting in Santa Rosa, you're a club member of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, Seattle University, it's really been a blessing, you know, the silver lining of COVID. If we approached work from a very old school model, I would say most of university leadership was against the idea of remote work or working from home or anything like that. And then we were all forced to do it for 1.5 years, and we were more successful than we've ever been. I think it just forced people to get really organized, to communicate in different ways, to modernize, and all of these ways that, because we're focused on mass communications, also helped us talk to our constituents better. So that big campaign that Karina and I did a session on, that fully existed remote. We ran our most successful giving day last year fully remote. Like, a lot of our appeals performed higher than they ever have, and that was fully remote. So I've been with the university for close to 6 years. And when we knew that we were expecting, my husband and I just made the difficult decision that we needed to move back to California to be closer to family. But I love my job. I love the university. I love what I do. So I sat down and have the conversation with them of, you have seen the way we've been performing. You know, would this be something that you would consider? And they were happy to do it. And now the full university is doing a test for all of this year called a flex work program, where each team sat down and they were able to write out what they wanted their schedule to be, of how much they would be in the office. There were thought exercises of, like, how are you going to deal with these common issues that come up? Provide some documentation for that. How are you going to check in with your team to make sure everyone's hitting their goals? But in many ways, I think it's helping people to be more strategic, because, you know, anyone who's taken a management or a business class knows it's not about how long someone's butt is in the seat in the office. It's about if you're hitting your objectives, if you're innovating, if you have that growth mindset. So I am hoping that everyone continues to knock it out of the park and the university keeps its hybrid model. And it has helped our immunocompromised staff. It has helped staff who struggle with physical disabilities. So most of my team is remote most of the time. They'll come into the office 1 day a week. Some teams have folks who come into the office a little bit more. If you're focused on basically connecting with students, then you would need to be around a bit more.
Thanks for that. And anybody else jump in if you've got a similar story. Ashleigh, I want to ask you, you're sort of in an interesting pickle in the middle in this conversation, where you could be advising your clients that they shouldn't be requiring people to come into an office or relocate, or you could be advising the people looking for a job that, no, you really need to move because this is that great of an opportunity. So what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I think a lot of it, our team is really based on relationships. So it's looking at where people at, because sometimes we know that, like, certain organizations are going to want it to be in certain locations. So for example, we had one recently that was for annual giving that was a flexible location, but they still wanted it in 3 kind of key areas where there are a lot of their donors. So it's flexible, but it's not fully remote. So sometimes we have those and it attracts a good group, but you know, sometimes people have to look at where are they in their current moment of their career, of their life stage, of other family dynamics. I had somebody recently say, I'm helping my stepmother because my father just passed away. Now it's not a good time to move. I can, but not now. So it's this balancing act of listening to people where they are. Our goal is always to kind of get them in the middle, right? Like if it's really that great opportunity that this is the one thing for the candidate and one thing for the organization, then finding that. But it's usually figuring out how do we push everybody to each end, because when they say absolutely have to be in the office all the time, it's like, well, do they, or can they be here a couple days a week if they're able to be a few hours away? Or so it's usually that hybrid where we find the most success, unless the ways we've really gotten the fully remote is if it's a really unique organization. Like I think higher education and annual fund has a better chance of attracting some. It's if you have a population around you. If you're in a really small town, then it's going to be harder. So there's lots of different dynamics as far as when we kind of push and suggest, and a lot of it's based on just data that we've started to collect. Where is it that you'll get more candidates and more high quality individuals? And sometimes when they really want them in the office, then it's a matter of, then what are transferable skills? You don't need to say we need X amount of years doing X exact role. What type of person are you looking to have? So it's not a cut and dry answer, I don't think, Bob, because it's really where are the negotiables and where are the non-negotiables, and where do you kind of meet in the middle, but have it so that it's a very welcoming process. Because when people or organizations say, I absolutely cannot do this, then that usually stops conversations. So.
Yeah, no, point well made. Thank you for that. And you know, nothing against Peoria, but you're exactly right that, you know, there's a limit to the annual giving talent you're going to find in Peoria. My wife works for a man whose goal is to get every butt back into its seat at some point, and we're in the middle of Chicago where you might be able to get away with that because there's other butts to find for the seats, right?
Well, and on Peoria, it's actually life stages. I actually helped with that one, and she has a spouse that's a coach. And so it's not just one person, it's when are there multiple things. And does Peoria have lots of great employment opportunities for multiple people? And like you're saying, Chicago, you know, you can find things, but if it's smaller locations, it makes it trickier. So creativity is helpful if you want to attract different types of talent. So really, really good point, Bob.
We'll just say, anecdotally, we are not offering a ton of remote options. And I think it has, again, this is anecdotal, I think it is somewhat affecting our recruiting. We've got a lot of open positions right now. And, you know, Boise's not Peoria, but it's not a huge talent pool. And in combination with, you know, I don't know if this has been on your radar, but I think we were the highest increased cost of living in the first half of the year nationwide. And so those combination of factors are making it really difficult for our recruiting, I would say, to kind of offer that counterpoint to what Margaret was saying, or the same point from the opposite side.
It's a huge equity issue, like especially thinking about in Seattle, any staff member under a director, it is often rare that they'll be able to afford to live within an hour to an hour and a half commute of campus. So then you're putting 3 hours of commute time on people's plates. Or you can let them just commute into the office once a week or less.
I feel like she's made those points before. Again, anybody chime in? And Laura put in the chat a very sensible request. If anybody, whether it's the panel or anybody listening in, has a link to their org chart, she's in an org chart collection mode, and I think that's it seems like one thing we could offer in such a call the annual giving org chart is show us your org chart. So put a link in the chat, or I think my merry band here, we could probably cobble together a set of org charts when we're done. But thanks for that request, Laura. I want to come back to leadership annual giving for a moment, because that has fascinated me over the last 2 years. It was fascinating even before the pandemic to see annual giving offices trying to staff a leadership annual giving team, you know, because we didn't really have the budget to send them to too many far-flung places. If they were really good, they would get bumped up to the major gift office, because why keep them down at a lower level? If they struggled with it, why keep them in that role? And so how places dice and slice leadership and annual giving has been interesting. Now there's the additional layer, an opportunity, I think, some would say, and Tyrell, I'm going to drag you into this conversation again in a minute, because now the whole population is on Zoom, and we've geographically liberated our ability to connect with leadership and annual giving prospects wherever they might be. I think Connor might say this can be a function of his student calling team in part two. So Margaret, let me come back to you. You're hiring for a leadership annual giving officer. Is that going to be a digital engagement officer or a road warrior, or how will that work?
So we looked into both options, so digital engagement officer or a leadership annual giving officer. And what we decided is, with those tasks that our senior admin has been handling, she is more of a digital gift officer. She is focused on retention, I think, is the big divide of digital gift officers, really strongly focused on retention. A leadership annual gift officer we see as really chasing down more proactively those upgrades, those like junior major gift asks. So we're going to call it, rather than digital experience or donor experiences, we're going to have her be the donor liaison. And we absolutely need a leadership annual giving officer at Seattle University due to the way we've historically approached things. So the way that I got leadership to sign off on us being able to build the position and start getting that approved by higher leadership is running the numbers on, we have quite a few major gift officers, and they focus on asks of 100K plus or sometimes 25K plus. We have this small annual giving team that, particularly in the last 3 fiscal years, is 100% focused on broad-based solicitation. That is like $5, $20, $100. We don't care, as long as we're trying to increase our alumni participation rate. And that has left a massive gap where anyone who gives under 25K gets almost no special attention. And we have our President's Club Society of 1K donors, but it's really hard to squeeze in. It's not on anyone's radar as their main task to make those people feel special and to retain them. So I ran the numbers on, we really had a retention problem with those folks. If we were to, I think it was an Oregon State or Portland, someone, they did a presentation called Fixing the Leaky Bucket. And I stole so much from that presentation, because it's, if we could retain even 50% of the people we're losing every year, here's like the millions of dollars we would be making. If we look at, we have some target gift range metrics, and you can compare that to the ways that people are actually giving and see the big gap. Like, if these 1,000 people were on a leadership annual giving officer's radar who work to grow them to their target gift range, here's how many more dollars you could be bringing in. And then it also keeps people from just falling straight off of our pipeline. So we have a big pipeline hole where you come in at the annual giving level, you probably aren't getting much special attention, and you might leave. So we have our donor liaison officer who's going to focus on making sure your annual giving level people feel stewarded and appreciated, and that lag officer who's going to really act as a junior major gift officer to work on growing and retaining 1K plus people, and funneling up to our major gift officers who are now looking behind them as we wrap up an 8-year campaign and having that panic attack of there's nobody left in the pool, there's nobody new. So it's a problem we should have been addressing 5 or more years ago, but we're addressing it now, and we're getting the attention and resources we need.
Margaret, how big of a portfolio will that person have?
I think the cream of the crop will be around 1,000.
Okay, yeah. So that's what we're thinking as we.
And I'm really curious, Andrea, it sounds like you guys tried and something went awry. So I'd love to hear lessons learned from that.
Well, the position we had before as a donor advisor position, they were working with like 200 to 300 people. So it wasn't meeting the scale that we, I think, need to meet. And, they were doing some in-person visits and just, I think that's where we're going down more of, we're calling it a donor experience officer or renaming it, but thinking of it in that 1,000 person, like how do you, I think a lot with annual giving of like, how does mid-level giving start building on the persona concept? So Not that I, as Andrea, as a mid-level fundraiser, know exactly who Margaret is, but I know like Margaret has characteristics that are really similar with this other group of people, and I'm going after this group in a targeted way. So yeah,
We know the Margarets.
yep.
And we are leaning away from, of course, some in-person visits will be on their plate, but really leaning into Zoom and small group engagement, and then mini proposals, which I've heard about in a few different presentations of, even if you take people and bucket them into groups of 50 or 100 or 300, maybe they were sunsetted out of an annual giving portfolio. Maybe they've been a 1K donor for 5+ years and they're ready for that stretch ask. And it's almost like a miniature direct mail campaign where you might get something in the mail that looks like a 5-page proposal that was written just for you, but really it was all done with the power of merged text. And then you get a follow-up Zoom call or a follow-up thank you video from that leadership annual giving officer.
Yeah.
All right, I will not have turn into a segmentation discussion, but sorry, go ahead, Connor.
I was gonna chime in a little bit there. So we at Boise State used to have 3 leadership annual giving officers. We transitioned them to DXOs about 1.5 years ago. And I'll be somewhat brief in my comments because they don't actually report through our annual giving team. And we added 2 more positions this year as DXOs who are focused strictly on athletics. So we currently have 5 of those digital experience officers. They report to the same person I do on our AVP as part of the development team. I think it has been, and I will hesitate to give too strong an opinion here, a mixed experience in my opinion. I think certainly those folks are bringing in gifts at a much faster rate than they were as leadership annual giving officers. They're not doing, nearly the same time of, the time to gift is much quicker, and the number of folks they're able to meet with and connect with is much higher. That said, the sort of level of giving we're finding hasn't been quite equivalent to what it was before. And so we're not necessarily filling that pipeline, at least from my perspective, as well as we had hoped that program would. And from my perspective overall, I think a lot of the things behind the digital experience officer sort of movement that's happening make a ton of sense, or very, good concepts. My one pitch that I think Bob hinted at earlier that I'm sure I will repeat over and over again is I really believe we can have students do most of that work. And you can pay a student $15 an hour instead of 50 grand a year. And then your donor is talking to a student, they're talking to the person who benefits from it, and they're getting that direct personal connection. Again, I recognize that's a statement that, not a lot of universities are willing to make the jump on. And I would say Boise State is one of those that hasn't yet. But that's kind of the direction I'm continuing to push for it to move, as call centers sort of shift. I don't want to say decline entirely, but I think that's a real role where we can use some of those resources we already have and fill in student employees, give them a really good professional experience that also builds up our internal professional pipeline for, future gift officers, advancement professionals. And I think the final piece to that is that, to me, is another way that we really address some of the issues around diversity in advancement. Of if we're recruiting people as students into this professional experience and showing them their professional roles, that's going to be one of our best avenues to sort of expand the field, I think.
Thank you for that. And, I think maybe both things can be true, that you can have some useful use of students and also make it somebody's full-time job to figure out. Some of us are still probably with phone-a-thon programs with students in pajamas and, one sort of experience that is in the middle of evolving, but a point well taken. His name keeps coming up and Oregon State keeps being referred to for their fabulous presentations. We should probably give one of the founding fathers of the DXO movement, as Connor would describe it, Tyrell. And Tyrell, I'm going to give you a chance for any rebuttal to anything that's been said so far by these folks, but I have a question that I don't think I've asked you before. Sort of on this topic about skill sets and hiring and the things Ashleigh is seeing, what do the resumes look like of the people that get hired at Oregon State as donor experience officers? I could imagine a whole range of possibilities.
Good question. You're so kind with your words, Bob. But yeah, excited to add to the conversation. Actually, we have one of the DXOs on the chat right now. Hi, Melanie. Welcome. Feel free to ask her any particular questions. She's been doing the role since June. I was about to say January, June in that particular role. But I think based on what we've done because we've been doing the program about 2.5 years now, started this process July of 19 with us hiring the first round of DXOs back in December of 2019. So they've been doing outreach about 2 years with a 1,000-person portfolio. And each one of the DXOs, I think, have a unique characteristic. And what I was looking at wasn't necessarily looking at fundraising experience. You can teach fundraising, as you know, you can teach annual giving. But I think one thing that you can't teach is that customer relation and some of those transferable skills. So what I look for a lot in when I was hiring is that customer service, because a lot of what they're doing is how can you tailor that experience for different donors based on using kind of their intuition. So one initial person that we hired came from a student affairs background on campus. She was a donor to the university, and she actually kind of fit the mold of the ideal person that would be in the portfolio. So she gave a unique perspective on this is the methodology of how I would be targeted if I was in someone's portfolio. So that was good from that sense. We had another person who was in fundraising, albeit a little bit green in terms of having full-time experience. She had experience from a student aspect, but nonetheless, some development experience. And we thought that would be a good mix to the existing other DXO. And then the last person that we hired in the initial group came from a sales background, some more customer relations, customer service, knew the university, grew up in Corvallis. We knew, I figured with the combination of the student affairs, someone who was an alum that grew up in the city, as well as someone that had a fundraising experience, mixing the different talents could bode well. And one thing that has kind of come true from the initial hypothesis and thought process is that, you know, all the goals are the same, but everyone's going to approach the goal differently. And it's been good to see that magic and secret sauce come from all the DXOs of they're going to the same end goal, their philosophy and process is the different. So one thing that I knew would happen is that they would learn from each other, essentially throw stuff against the wall, what's working, what's not. And then from there, you kind of have that cross-pollination of ideas that's happening within the DXO program. You'd say, oh, this email has really great open rate, what are you doing? And then from there, they're really sharing ideas, and that's really what's made our program successful. And our initial DXO really focused in a lot on retention. I think Margaret talked about hers focusing in on retention, but one thing that we're adding to the mix that I think is really going to help them move the needle in terms of overall donor counts is this next one that we're hiring. We'll focus purely on acquisition, and the metrics will be a little bit different compared to the existing retention DXO, so to speak. But that one be purely focused on non-donors, increasing our overall acquisition number, as well as dollars in the door from some of those non-donors that we haven't got engaged. So really looking forward to that position and how it's going to mix in with our existing DXOs.
So I'm not hearing many regrets in your voice about the people you chose and the backgrounds they had.
Oh, not at all, not at all. We've been able to get some really good incremental wins over the last 2 years. Initial goals were set a little bit too high. I think we didn't know what we didn't know in terms of the structuring, but I think coming into year 2 last year, I think we restructured a lot of the metrics, and we really came within 4% of hitting the revised metrics, which kind of let me know we're heading in the right direction in terms of those overall metrics. And I think year 3 is going to be even more optimization that we'll see from the DXOs.
I think there's a generation of advancement offices that's coming to an end where you would just hire the best graduating student callers every year to come work in the annual giving office, and that became a career track for a lot of people, because you could go be a major gift fundraiser, you could stay in annual giving, even though I think we've always suffered a little bit from feeling like the kid at the grown-up table sometimes, although the skill set for annual giving has gotten so much more complex than I think it was once upon a time too. Connor, do you want to say something?
I was just going to say, we pretty much took exactly what Tyrell had laid out as the criteria he was looking for in hiring when we hired our DXOs, and it's worked out great for us. So I think of our 5 DXOs we have, 2 of them were previously in that leadership annual giving role already on our staff. One of them was a student athlete from out of state from another university, and the other 2 were both working as servers at like local sandwich shops. And they've been perfect in the role. You know, they had great customer service skills, great people skills, and were enthusiastic about the job. So I think
one of the things I learned from, I think, Tyrell or his colleagues' past presentation that resonated well when presenting to our leadership team is that a comfort level of reaching out to people you've never talked to before that our development officers aren't comfortable with anymore. I think when you've been working with this curated portfolio for so long, discovery starts to fall by the wayside, and the idea of cold calling someone maybe becomes more terrifying, or you think it's a waste of time. So I remember one of my first jobs early on was sales, and it was for a bakery, and you're just picking up the phone and you're talking to bakery managers at grocery stores, trying to get them to carry your product. And that's the kind of folks that we're looking for to fill that role.
Well, the classic old annual giving data junkie, you know, and the extroverted, you know, people person isn't naturally the most, you know, easy combination of skills. And I think that's why institutionally we made a mistake sort of setting up the idea that annual giving people need to progress up to a personal portfolio and major gift job, because some of them are just happy frolicking with their data.
Well, and on that too, so Tyrell, when you posted those jobs, what did you put as the requirements? Because I think this is a good point. Like, the more you want to invite people into conversations, the more you have to have kind of that looking for skill sets or looking for things. So as you wrote that and kind of as you utilize that, I'm going to guess there wasn't the 5 years of X experience type of thing, but how did you kind of write that so you were inviting people that had like skill set and like interesting perspective into that conversation so that then you could see if they are a good match for what you were looking for? How did you do that as others think about just building teams that are, as Tyrell, you said, a cultural shift? It's not the same as what the past job description was.
Yeah, so one thing we did that I don't know if we took from Tyrell or not, so I'll let him answer if this was originally his thing. We didn't have any minimum experience or anything, and we had a pretty high salary range for the area for that experience level, which helped. But I think the thing that really helped us not necessarily get people in, but once they were applying, was we required everyone who applied to submit a video as sort of a like introduction. And that was really where we were able to like pick up on a lot of those other qualities.
Yeah.
So instead of a resume pile, now there's a video pile.
Yeah, we did a similar philosophy, so I had to relook at the job description as I was talking. So we kept the minimum requirements really simple. So looking at it right now, 1 year professional experience, either in direct sales, fundraising, or marketing, and looking at it from that lens, a lot of what the DXOs are doing or what we're doing, it's sales enablement tactics. So a lot of what you see within enterprise or for some type of sales and marketing company, those are the transferable or technical skills that you're looking that's going to translate over to this role. Because like you said, you can teach fundraising, but you can't teach how to actually sell something or have that customer service related driven attitude. And that's what I was really looking for. And much like what Connor mentioned as a part of our interview process, and Melanie can attest to this, as a portion coming out of that first round of interviews to kind of see how people were, their intuition on video. We had them do a video exercise. So with that, we gave them a mock donor, which was me. They had basic data in terms of where I graduated from, how much I've given, and a couple notes. And then from there, they had to create an introductory video to me using Vidyard, as well as an email attached with that video. So that was another way for us to see, based on the information that they have, can they use their intuition and really create an engaging video that's gonna wanna get the donor to click on that video or respond back. And we kind of use that as a baseline. We're kind of sifting through the people that we did hire.
Sounds like we did take that one from Tyrell after all.
Yeah, I wonder if this relates to one of the questions Bob posed to us was, you know, around like, what are the skills that you need on your team versus what you outsource for? When we originally, our donor advisor left in January. So, you know, here we are in December, still haven't filled that position. We posted one initially and it was like, well, you need to build the ship and figure out who your segments are gonna be and do all this stuff and also be a good donor experience person. And it was just, I think there's some challenge there with those skill sets being complementary. And so, you know, dare we say Evertrue's name, like we all know it's out there. Like, so part of me as a director in a really small shop is thinking, is it the best use of our team's time to figure out what we need to do to build a program, whether it's their student experience officers or donor experience officers, or is my best work and the best work of our human resources on staff that like interaction and the relationship and that piece. So we're still in the midst of considering that and figuring out where to invest.
Well, and for the folks in this chat who have suffered some attrition in staff, you know, do you automatically just rehire those same positions, right? To Andrea's point. And it really, I don't know if anybody else noticed, and I forget who it is, the company that's saying, we'll do your giving day for you. And that's sort of an intriguing, I mean, I thought it was sort of a collaborative celebration to bring all these offices together and produce a giving day. It was a great thing for your marketing communications people to feel good about fundraising for once and all the other pieces, parts. And now somebody's proposing, just hand it over and we'll run it for you. And you know, that's something I hadn't seen before either.
Well, and a couple of things too that I'm here, you know, we're definitely seeing there when organizations just take the job description that was on the shelf from 10 years ago and repost it, you know, it's obvious. Like, I think people see that and they're looking at what does it need, because I think you're all seeing demographics are shifting. You know, you've got the different types of donors, you've got different types of workers. Like COVID has made it so that people are even more interested in what is innovation and entrepreneur and flexibility and like lots of different things. But also, Tyrell, you put, you know, cultural shift and annual giving has shifted. I was just telling this to another one of my team members about planned giving, because I'm in that space too. And there's a university looking for an executive director of planned giving. And they said they don't need to have planned giving experience. They just need to be a really great leader. And I was like, well, then name it something else, because you're going to attract all of the people that have historically seen this type of role as this. So I think also, you know, you think of marketing, I think as you look at hiring people and doing things, Tyrell, I'd be interested in Connor, you know, you made a new title. You made something that's unique and different, that isn't just the same as what everybody thinks they know. So sometimes it's a play on words, but you know, we just did a search for Brown University and for an AVP that's annual giving and some of the DEI initiatives. It's just AVP. They didn't call it all kinds of other things. They just called it assistant vice president. So I think there's different ways you can look at things as you look at attracting talent. It's both what's in the details, but it's also what are those high end kind of level things too, because people also don't read. Sorry, people maybe read your whole job description, but I think all of you in annual giving probably know this more than anyone. People don't read. So like if you're actually writing a huge job description and it's all the way in the bottom, like 150 characters. So I think there's creative ways to invite people into conversations, especially if your organization is open to being creative, to shift what you're actually doing and how do you attract talent versus just somebody that looks like they have done what you think you need.
I am really curious to hear folks talk about, especially if you have a limited budget, we are under such tight budget constraints, what you determine to use a vendor for versus what you don't. Like, I think Seattle University, we're just sort of, I don't want to say anti-vendor, but it just hasn't been on the table because it tends to be incredibly expensive, like even more than a full-time position costs. So we do work closely with R&L, who manages our calling program, and we have done that upgrade in the last year to leverage the calling program into more of a full-blown engagement center. But Connor, I love what you're saying about utilizing students more. I think we just woke up to that in the last year, and you can get a lot of bang for your buck as well as passion there. And that's something I always hesitate with thinking about having a vendor take care of something, is like, do in their gut they understand what your university is about, what your mission is about. When a donor ask them that question about like, oh, well, what do you love on campus? But they're not actually associated with the university. Does that come off as really disingenuous? Or the thing lately that I've been leaning towards is what would it look like to use a vendor for our direct mail program, something like Pledge Mine. And it's like, what does it cost? How do they know what your constituents want to hear? You know, they do well, so they must have a wealth of expertise, but it feels like such a risk, because then how do you come back from that if you have a vendor and then it doesn't go well?
Yeah, for me to chime in on both those things, I think to the vendor question, I don't know if Boise State is necessarily vendor skeptical, but I am. And I think the way I tend to look at it is I like using vendors when we can for their sort of like products and infrastructure. So we have RNL for their campus call software, or it's not called campus call anymore, Engage. We also use their Scale Funder platform for our Giving Day. And we have a few other vendors that provide sort of products like that. I'm very skeptical of using vendors for services for all the reasons you said. I don't think there's that same level of personal connection there necessarily. It gets really hard, you know, you can't outsource the same experience you're going to have talking to a student. Like they're on campus, they're the ones taking the classes, they're the ones getting the scholarships. That's just not quite as replicable. The other piece I would say is, again, I think using students for all sorts of stuff. So with our Giving Day, initially it was run really heavily out of our annual giving office by our full-time staff. And this will be our 4th year, and our goal has been to slowly transition it to being a almost entirely student-run program. And we're getting pretty close, where I suspect like 2 more years we'll need. We're really, you know, I've got a couple of students who work full-time, or not full-time, but part-time with me in the office, who do all the coordination with different departments around campus. They find out what their priorities are. They do first drafts on all of our copy, and then our communications team can kind of just go in and edit. They develop marketing plans. They do outreach to local businesses for matches or other support. They've been doing the event planning. And so really, it does require a lot of guidance for them. And one thing that's been really nice the last 2 years is I've been able to retain one of those 2 students for 2 years each time. So they're sort of able to train the new person coming on. I think it'll be a lot harder with 2 new students. But they're great and they do a great job. And I think one of the things Bob said earlier was one of the sort of advantages of Giving Days that we see is being able to bring together all these different areas of campus. And I think a lot of those areas of campus are even more excited to get a chance to work directly with students rather than working with like us over in the advancement office. So, you know, we've even got like our parking and transportation department loves being a part of our Giving Day. And I think it's because it's the one time a year they get to have positive interactions with students. And so it's been a really nice thing in that regard. And I will say the other piece that has really helped me with being able to use students for that is recruiting students who are connected in other ways that we can kind of leverage. So for example, one of the 2 Giving Day coordinators we have this year is also our student body vice president. And so she's plugged into all of these different areas. And that was, you know, she's a great student. I would have hired her anyway, but I kind of strategically recruited her because of that we're able to overlap and work with these different areas in multiple ways. And so I think that's another piece to throw out there, I guess.
So Connor, I know you said you're a 1-person shop, but is like 100 or 95% of your job managing all of these students then?
I would say it's like 60 or 70%. I will say like things like we have a great communications and marketing team. So if I'm doing an appeal, a direct mail appeal, I'm coming to them with a concept with maybe speakers identified in general, like here's the funds we're doing, here's the messaging, but they're gonna probably write my copy, they're gonna do the design work. So it's not, I'm the one full-time official annual giving staff is the best way to put it. It's not like I'm totally doing all this stuff.
Love the partnership.
That would not be. But yeah, it does take a ton of time managing students. I think really the key thing is hiring students who want to be getting the skill set and not just like, in the call center all the time, I'll hire students who like, you know, they need a job to pay their rent, and that's great. I think that's a good role for us. But I think with some of these other areas, I've got to find students who really want that skill set that they're getting as much as they need the paycheck.
Thank you for that. the word digital is coming up in the chat a lot, and I was going to ask about digital. So I already told you my Bob Bruditsky theory about how for a generation we hired student callers to work in the annual giving office. I think that first ran into trouble when digital started to become a thing, and your student callers weren't necessarily digital experts. And so we had to go looking for talent elsewhere. Then Giving Days came along, and I think we defined, you know, that there was some upside to really concentrating on digital and channels and all that. But I don't think we still solved the question of where do you go to find that expertise. I'm curious, for those of you who now have digital annual giving members, or maybe you don't. And again, like we've said, one of the early benefits of Giving Days was it got you to play nicely with the marketing communications and their digital team. But I really think we're at a tipping point where this is going to reside a little more deliberately in the annual giving wing of the org chart. But that still doesn't solve my quandary about where you go to find digital fundraising. And Rick Erickson, who's talking tomorrow, famously said in a panel a year ago at this conference that the day the pandemic hit, your 23-year-old digital fundraiser on your team became the most important person in that entire org chart. And so, again, I'm not directing this at anyone. Margaret, I'll throw it to you first. I mean, where do you go when you want digital expertise?
I think there's really two sides to that. Like when I think of digital, I'm thinking of both external and internal. Like Tyrell mentioned, scalability. So for us, we've gotten a lot better at cobbling together external digital communication. So we have like our youngest team member who does all this great graphic design, or who is a new assistant director who wants to get us in on TikTok for our giving day. Like that's phenomenal. You know, working with across the university to get more social media posts, working to remove barriers to giving. Like we're about to upgrade all of our giving pages because they're so incredibly clunky. That's externally facing, but I think the big roadblocks that we've yet to tackle are the internal of like, you can't scale anything until you make it work more efficiently. And that's where you need that true expertise. And it can't be Google searching and then figuring it out and then building it, or it can be, but that's just really challenging. So for instance, we watched the Oregon State University stuff and it was all on, you know, using Evertrue, but we were saying we can't afford Evertrue, so how are we going to do this on our own with some fancy Excel spreadsheet work? Or an example is our Giving Day really took off in the last 2 years, but then it took us 2 weeks to process all the gifts that came in because you're like manually entering them from the Scale Funder platform into Razor's Edge until we switched our payment processor to Blackbaud Merchant Services and then bought the patch so that it can integrate and that can be processed.
Right, all right.
So we're like building the plane as we fly it. And that is something that I've seen talked at a few case conferences lately of just universities can be really slow to make that technological infrastructure change, but our customers, our prospects are now really demanding, like they want the Amazon experience. They want the Facebook experience of like, why when I go to this page, does it not already know where I've made gifts? Like, why is this generic ask for support instead of an ask for support based on where I usually give, or the links that I've clicked in your emails that tell you I'm interested in this and not this. So like we drive people away, we're letting them down, we're spamming them. And I don't have an answer for how we figure all of that out without throwing some money at it or getting some expertise in. But I really like a couple of the things that Tyrell mentioned of you either have to make the case for support for more resources, or you, like what we have done is, here's the pot of money we have for annual giving. Here's the chunk we've been spending on direct mail, which is great for retention, but not much else. Let's take this much of that money, and now we spend more in our relationship with RNL because what we're trying to drive is acquisition, and they're the best at that next to our giving day. So it's like, here's your pot of money. How can you reallocate it to achieve the new objectives and use the new technology?
Well, I also do not have an answer. We have struggled with that same thing a lot, I think, where externally we're able to adopt a lot of pretty cool new technologies and ideas and things. Partly because we have a really awesome person on our communications team who just loves that stuff, and I am terrified for the day she leaves us. But I think part of it, from my perspective, is with some of those internal things, we're competing with sectors that we just can't compete with on a salary level. And so we've had a few people come into our organization who do have the skill set, and they leave really quickly with a job offer that pays twice as much. I still don't have an answer for how to mitigate that. The best idea I'm coming up with now, and this may not be an option for everybody, but we recently started a data, what do you call it? Like a data science graduate program at our university. So I'm going to try and get a graduate assistant through that program. It's a formal role. Again, students, and not quite filling the same need, but knowing that I'm, as much as I ask, never going to get a competitive salary for an analyst or something. That's kind of the best option I've got, is again, finding what are the things I can offer that can supplement that, and it's experience and training.
Hey, Ashleigh, can I ask a question of you, given your, again, your useful role kind of as a middle person in this. Do you ever feel that college and universities cling too much to people with an education fundraising background? I mean, present company excluded, of course, but I've seen some people who are just kind of survivors in this profession and can kind of set my watch. They'll be at another institution in another 2.4 months, which doesn't guarantee they're being effective anywhere. So, you know, we've been touching on this subject. Do you go get bankers? Do you go get people who worked at the bakery? Do you, I mean, you sort of see who gets placed and who succeeds in these roles. Do we wind up being too kind of inbred in making that the first thing we look at on a resume?
Short answer, yes. I think higher ed is really hard at that. I think other types, higher ed and healthcare tend to be the two that really focus on, well, they haven't done this. And a lot of times it's they haven't worked with a dean. Well, deans are deans, faculty is faculty. Yes, it's a different type of relationship that people can learn that, but that's usually like what we get to. Even when people's organizations, like they're moving towards wanting to be more inclusive with who they bring in, non-traditional. What's hard when we get to some of the roles that we see, because we see them at the director, I mean, we see major gift officer, absolutely. We see that being more open to things, because it's how do we fill that in as a relationship, or if it's a skill base like prospect management or prospect research. When we start getting into like an AVP position, they find it really hard, because it's like, well, how would they be credible in this space? So I think it gets harder the higher up you get, more management. I think when it's individual contributors, it's a little bit easier. But I think the biggest thing is looking at it all ends up being the hiring manager, because it's really what you can get through HR. Like, how can you make it so that you are taking things out of the job description rather than adding things into the job description. We really encourage people to not put master's degree preferred, because that's going to kind of encourage people that you really want it, even if it says the word preferred. The years of experience with preference for higher education fundraising, take it out. I think what Tyrell said, as far as that, their job description is really good. Like, I'm sure you got lots of applicants with 1 year. I'd be curious how many people came in, because that probably got you a lot. But I think the more you can take out some of those preferences, the better. And then it's really looking at what is the skills that you need and articulating that. And also, to Connor's point about, yeah, salary, it's, you know, a lot of times people come to nonprofits, and higher ed sometimes gets interesting because higher ed doesn't lead sometimes as much with mission and the why. You know, it leads with we're all the same and we're about education. That's really generic, but sometimes. In this job market, it's really focusing on what's in it for the candidate, what's in it for the person that's coming in, whether it's they want to make an impact or they want to try something new. So if they're joining a dynamic team, tell them about it, get them excited about it. Because I can't tell you how many people that I interview that say, I have some salary expectations, and they say it's not about the money. But until you open up some of those things, this is going to be about the money. Now, I've had people in private sector they're okay taking a 50% cut if they think they're going to be making a difference, and if they think that their skill set is going to be valuable. That might be towards the end of their career. So also making sure you're not doing ageism, because sometimes people, even if they're 70, if I'm working with somebody right now that helped build the FedEx it's like CRM system. So they were ahead of the game. So there's different ways to look at things. So I think it starts with having it inclusive and inviting job descriptions that's about skills, not about experiences. But Andrea.
A colleague of mine sort of like, mind blown when the last time I had a job posting out, he said, well, how have you written this job post to market to Gen Z? And it was like, definitely didn't do that. I copied our job template from HR and like put in, tweak things. And so I think also kind of what I hear you saying, Ashleigh, is like, how are we thinking about job postings as marketing as well, which is a little bit new to me, at least certainly thinking about the age that we're likely to be hiring within given salaries.
Well, and it's not even just age. If you guys follow us, so right now I'm leading all of our social media for Aspen because our marketing person actually left in the middle of COVID. So I am our marketing person. So if you don't like our social media, feel free to let me know too. But it's really focusing on the why. It's focusing on what it's in for them. People want to work with people too. So a lot of them will include a quote. We include quotes now in all of our prospectuses about what's in it for them. We actually did a search for Human Rights Watch for their chief development officer. And the thing I had done to post, they cut it apart and they said, this has more to do with us and nothing to do with the candidate. Who would want to work for us? Try it again. So that was chief development officer for Human Rights Watch, which I think the title and organization speaks for itself. But because of the job market, and that's all people, it's not just Gen Z, it's everybody. And but it goes also, it's not just the beginning, it's following through, because you can say all you want that you're doing an inclusive search process, but at the end, if you still go to the person that has the 10 years of experience or that it's done XYZ, then you're not really doing it. So Tyrell, you were shaking your head a lot too, and you're putting good comments. I don't know if you wanted to be called out.
Oh, he loves it. He's sending this recording to Evertrue. Are you kidding?
No, I think you make great points about the hiring process. I think you have to change up your philosophy if you want to get outside the box candidates. So I think that's one thing we've really done well. I think the last 4 years as an organization, we have a great person that heads our talent management, our recruiting and talent management, and he takes a different approach. But also, I think from an organizational standpoint, you have to put emphasis on recruiting diversity, and that's one thing that we've done the last 2 years is that it's embedded in all of our goals. So overall, from an organization, we put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, in making sure that we're recruiting diverse candidates, and it's built into our body Q goals for every year. I'm leading the staffing in terms of the students. How can we increase our diversity from our student standpoint in terms of employees? And we're also using that as a way to build a talent pipeline for all our future other gift officers that we have, whether it's from an ADOD to a DXO, starting from that student standpoint and translating that into a higher talent pipeline 2 to 3 years down the line once they've gotten a little bit more familiar with the foundation and its processes.
Thank you for that. And we're running out of time. This was my fastest session of the day, I think. So thanks to everybody. I'll offer one last thought, and I'll see if we go around the group if anybody else wants to chime in. And like so many people in this group, I will steal from Tyrell with mine. He put in the chat a thought I really like. He said, annual giving is now a bunch of little marketing strategies. And what I am fond of saying is that we're now the annual giving agency. And, we're only limited by our creativity, right? And so I'll second Tyrell's thought. And as you think about how you staff these skills, I mean, it really is a much more complex task than what I remember as a boy in the phonathon room. So I appreciate everybody's comments and insights. Margaret, you got anything?
I would just second that of when our annual giving shop was housed in the major gifts department, it was just kind of cold and overly professional and very rinse and repeat the same sort of physical based communications every year. And our acquisition, retention, reactivation was just slowly declining. And when we made that change in fiscal year 19 and merged with the Office of Alumni Engagement and came at things from more of a marketing engagement. How are we adding value to people's lives? How are we being something other than junk mail that they hate receiving? Like, how do we be exciting? How are we reaching broad audiences? Like, annual giving changes so much every year. And I think that's why a lot of students, a lot of young professionals are drawn to it. It is like marketing, but it's marketing with purpose. Like, so many of us are working for nonprofits, or our universities have this mission. And when you like fully embrace that and start having fun with it, you turn the graph around. So I think it can be hard if you have a leadership team that's still thinking in the old school mentality, and you've got to come to these sessions and get all the tips so that you can make your case of like, XYZ institution has drastically changed, and look at the results that they've seen. We can do this too.
Thank you for that. Connor, does anyone think Connor will get through final remarks without talking about students? Go ahead, Connor.
I was actually just gonna second. I got nothing to add as far as students on that piece. I think I have made my point. So
You did great. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You're just seconding Margaret. I guess so.
Yes.
Andrea, something to add?
Well, I just appreciate the reminder, Connor, that we can always do things less expensively. And so I'm sort of coming out of this inspired by what's possible for students, and maybe thinking about, is that third position that we need on our team more of a student managing position, and then letting them really lead us forward. So
yeah, I guess I can think of something to add. Now that you reminded me. If anyone is ever wanting to advocate for more student positions and running into trouble, the best case I have been able to make is that we are all educational institutions, and providing an education that leads to professional experiences for students is ultimately the goal of our institution. And anything we can do in our work to incorporate that education piece just pushes that overall institution's mission along further. And that seems to be where I get the best reception, is playing it that way.
Well, and Connor, we kid because we love, right? I'm a proud graduate of the Miami University Student Foundation, and I gave the campus tours, and I do what I do today because I loved the idea of promoting my alma mater. So keep on keeping on.
Same way. I think that's how I got into all of this.
Ashleigh, anything else? You've been really eloquent. Anything else we missed?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, because you guys actually going to Connor's with the students, so I'll take it in for him. What you talked a little bit about grad school and the training. I would just say, as you think about all of these, it is that, just to sum it up, like looking at the skills that each of these roles need and reskilling. But I would also say across organizations, have stay conversations with folks. So asking them what it would take for them to stay, because as you're looking to fill new roles, you'd be amazed with how many people I talk with that feel like they love their organization, they love where they're at, but they feel stuck. So that's in donor relations, that's maybe in a major gift, that might be in, look across the organization. And I think as from the whole organization, have those conversations about, are people happy, what would it take for them to stay? Because if everything is it's as exciting as everybody's talking about in the annual giving, then you have a great opportunity to just do that marketing internally too. So I think that's another interesting area to look at. So that's what I would say. But really good conversation. So thanks for having us, Bob. Thanks for organizing all of this. This was great.
Thank you. And Tyrell, just so you know, the only reason I'm not giving you a chance is because I got to go buy drinks at the bar now. But I appreciate everything you shared verbally and in the chat and everywhere else. And join us in person next time. It'd be fun to get together. All right, Margaret, thank you for a great day. And thanks Connor and Andrea and Ashleigh and Tyrell too, and everybody who chimed in and listened in. Nice end to the day. Thanks to everybody for being here. We'll see where I am geographically tomorrow, but I will look forward to day 2 tomorrow. Thanks everybody. Bravo.
All right.